I have filed dispatches from 11 conflicts. I have stood in the rubble of 3 human colonies after the cleanup crews finished and the command. Photographers left, and the only light was whatever the sky could manage. I have interviewed survivors who spoke in the flat, stripped-down sentences of people who have already used all their other words. I have knelt beside men who were dying and asked them their names, their hometowns, what they wanted people to know, because that is the job, and the job does not stop for grief. I thought I understood what a war looked like from the inside. I did not. Not until Vela Station. Not until the 9 minutes. Not until I stood on the sunlit steps of the grand reliquary of the Orathi Sanctum and watched the Judgment Compact make its accounting and understood, in my chest and my marrow, and someplace deeper than either, that I had been covering skirmishes my entire career and had never once seen what humanity actually was. My name is Sable Reyes. I hold a press credential issued under the Joint Correspondence Charter, a document the Judgment Compact honored in full. They gave me access. They gave me a handler. They gave me a position in the 4th wave of the ground element. And they asked only that I not transmit until the operation was complete. I agreed. I am a journalist, not a saboteur, and the Compact's terms were clear. What I witnessed on the surface of Orathi Prime was not classified. It was, in the most precise sense of that word, deliberate, performed in full daylight, at the speed of organized human will, for an audience of every civilization within 17 light-years that had a receiver and the sense to use it. This is my account. I am filing it now 7 hours after the Grand Reliquary fell silent. I am filing it because the charter requires I do, because the story is not the kind you hold back from the record. Let me start where every dispatch in this war starts, with Vela Station. Vela Station was a Class IV Combined Research and Habitat Installation, orbital platform designations VH7, in the Vela Corridor. A stretch of space that had been under joint, human-neutral administrative custody for 61 years under the Meridian Compact, one of the oldest continuous interstellar agreements humanity had signed. The station housed 41,220 people. A third of them were researchers, astrophysicists, xenobiologists, material scientists, full epidemiological teams studying the corridor's peculiar atmospheric chemistries. A third were civilian support staff, engineers, administrators, the people who run the water reclamation and the cafeterias and the schools. And there were schools. Vela Station had 4 primary schools, 2 secondary academies, and a small university annex with 340 enrolled students, most of them in their first 2 years of study, most of them between 18 and 22 years old. The remaining third were families, dependents, people who had built their lives around someone who worked on the station and had chosen to be there rather than elsewhere. Children. The youngest registered resident of Vela Station at the time of the attack was 11 weeks old. Her name was Mira Solen Okafor. She had been born on the station to a materials scientist named Dr. Adeyezi Okafor and a school administrator named Tomas Okafor. Both of her parents died with her. I am including her name in this dispatch because she had a name, and because the names of the dead are the only thing a journalist can offer that the military cannot. The Orathi Sanctum had contested the Vela Corridor for 16 years. Not through negotiation, through a series of increasingly aggressive territorial declarations delivered by Sanctum envoys to the Meridian Administrative Council and ignored, or declined, or answered with the kind of diplomatic patience that assumes the other party is also interested in patience. The Sanctum was not interested in patience. The Sanctum was interested in the corridor's position along what their theological cartographers had designated the third sacred transit line, a cosmological concept from their faith tradition that I am not qualified to explain in full, which held, essentially, that certain vectors in space were the paths the Sanctum's divine architect had walked at the moment of creation, and that no non-Orathi presence could occupy those vectors without defiling the architect's work. Humanity occupied the Vela Corridor. Humanity had occupied it for 61 years. Humanity had built Vela Station there, and raised children there, and conducted science there, and the Orathi Sanctum had declared all of this a defilement, and after 16 years of ignored diplomatic declarations, they had decided to do something about it. I reviewed the full 16-year diplomatic record during the 71-hour transit aboard the unbroken Meridian. I will not reproduce it here. What the record shows in its totality is that the Meridian Administrative Council offered 12 separate formal mediation frameworks over that period, 7 of which included provisions for the observership rights over the corridor's administrative functions. A compromise that would have given the sanctum symbolic acknowledgement of their theological claim without requiring any human presence to be removed. The sanctum declined all 12. Their final communique to the council, transmitted 8 days before the attack, stated only that human presence on the architect's path was not subject to mediation, compromise, or observership frameworks, and that the sanctum was prepared to resolve the matter through means council procedure. The council's response, I am told, request for clarification of what those means were. No clarification was provided. I was not on Vela Station when it happened. I was on the Meridian Administrative Council's press ship, 3 light minutes out, attending a routine quarterly briefing on corridor usage statistics. I mention this because I have been asked, repeatedly, whether I saw it happen in real time. I did not. What I saw 3 minutes after the fact was the light of it arriving. The Sanctum's orbital battery array, 12 capital-class orbital bombardment platforms, each the size of a small moon, arrayed in a chevron formation above the ecliptic plane, opened fire on Vela Station at 09:14:7 station time. Their weaponry was a sustained plasma coherence beam system, which I am told by the Compact's ordnance analysts was designed specifically for rapid structural dissolution of large installations. It was not a weapon designed for military targets. It was a weapon designed to unmake things that were built. The bombardment lasted 9 minutes and 12 seconds. At the end of those 9 minutes and 12 seconds, Vela Station did not exist. The 41,220 people aboard it did not exist. The 4 primary schools, 2 secondary academies, the university annex with its 340 students, the water reclamation systems, the cafeterias, none of it existed. What remained was a distributed field of superheated particulate matter expanding outward at orbital velocities, and a thermal bloom detectable at 6 light-years. The Sanctum's fleet commander broadcast a statement 40 seconds after the final beam shut down. I have the transcript. I will not reproduce it in full, but its central clause, translated from the liturgical register, was something approximately like, "The architect's path has been reclaimed, and the defilement has been cleansed. And let those who would defile the sacred transit lines understand the cost of that presumption." The statement was received by 16 slinning posts, 4 neutral party observation vessels, the Meridian Administrative Council's press ship, and Earth's nearest military relay station. I remember sitting in the press ship's briefing room, watching the thermal bloom data scroll across the secondary screen, and feeling a very specific kind of silence fall over the room. The silence of people who have received information that their minds are refusing to process at full speed because full-speed processing would be unbearable. A correspondent from the Helios Syndicate was sitting 2 chairs to my left. She put her hands flat on the table in front of her and pressed them down hard, as if she needed to feel something solid. I understood the impulse. I do not know who first said 41,000. I remember the number going through the room in stages, each person arriving at it separately, each person's face changing in the same way, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the way a face changes when it finishes computing something terrible and has nowhere to put the answer. Press ship's captain sealed our transmitter. Not censorship procedure. There was a protocol for events of this category, and it had been developed after the Cardin massacre and updated after the 3rd relay incident. And what it said, in plain language, was, when something of this magnitude happens, you do not transmit raw data fragments into an information vacuum. You seal the transmitter, firm what you know, and wait for the formal's military acknowledgement before you file anything, because the alternative is 17 conflicting half-reports generating panic on 14 worlds before anyone has confirmed the facts. I'll tell you what I thought about while we waited. I thought about the university annex and its 340 students. I thought about the fact that a significant fraction of them would have been from families who had waited and saved years for seas to send a child to a university, even a small annex university, even one on a corridor station with cramped dormitories and an unimpressive cafeteria. I thought about what it meant to receive that kind of education, and I thought about all of them receiving it in the 9 minutes and 12 seconds, during which the Orathi's plascoherence beams were doing their work. And I thought about the 11-week-old Mira Solen Okafor, who had never been given a choice about being there, and who would never be given a choice about anything, now or ever. The formal military acknowledgement came 4 hours and 17 minutes later. It was not a statement from the Joint Defense Council. It was not a press release from the Secretary of Interstellar Affairs. It was a single-line transmission on the standard military broadcast frequency, authenticated with the Judgment Compact's command seal, which I had never previously seen used in an active transmission. The compact existed. I had known it existed. Every correspondent knew it existed. But it was the kind of institutional instrument that lives in treaties and contingency, documents and tends not to appear in real time. The transmission said, "The Judgment Compact is active. All civilian vessels in the following corridor sectors should clear to a distance of no less than 2 light hours within the next 72 hours. This is not a request." Then a second line, "The Orathi Sanctum is the subject of this operation. No other party should position assets in proximity to Orathi-designated space." Then a third line, and this was the one that made the Heliast correspondent make a sound I have never heard a journalist make before. A sort of involuntary exhale, like the air had been pressed out of her by something invisible. 600 warships are in transit. Arrival, 71 hours. I filed a one-sentence transmission to my editor the moment the press ship's captain unsealed the channel. The sentence was, "The Judgment Compact has been activated against the Orathi Sanctum following the destruction of Vela Station, and 600 warships are en route." Editor transmitted back in 40 seconds. The message was, "Are you going with them?" I transmitted back, "Yes." That was how I came to be embedded with the Judgment Compact's ground element for the operation against Orathi Prime. I want to be precise about what the Judgment Compact was, because I think there is a tendency in subsequent coverage, I have read some of it, in the 7 hours since the operation concluded, to describe it either as a secret literary program humanity had hidden or as a disproportionate, improvised reaction. It was neither. The compact had been established 23 years earlier, following the Lenthari occupation, in which the Lenthari hegemony had occupied the Dorado stations for 11 months, and the existing interstellar framework had taken 14 months of mediation to resolve it. The political consensus that came out of the Dorado affair was simple. The mediation framework was not a deterrent. It was a mechanism for resolving disputes after they had already become catastrophes. And a mechanism that only functions after the catastrophe is not the same thing as preventing the catastrophe. The Judgment Compact was humanity's deterrent, not a secret but not advertised. A standing operational structure, fully crewed and funded, a designated activation threshold. A human installation or vessel attacked resulting in mass civilian casualties, without prior declaration of war and without immediate cessation and reparation offer. Below that threshold, mediation. Above it, the compact, 41,000 dead. Declaration. No cessation, no reparation offer. No communication from the sanctum beyond the liturgical statement about the architect's path being reclaimed. The threshold had never been crossed in 23 years. It had been crossed now. I boarded the compact's carrier, Unbroken Meridian, 9 hours after the sanctum's bombardment. My handler was a compact logistics officer named Warrant Officer Driss, a quiet man in his late 40s, who had the particular economy of movement that comes from spending decades in confined military spaces. He showed me to a press berth, explained the transmission embargo, nothing filed until the operation was complete, which I had already agreed to, and then said, in the same flat tone he used for everything, that the corridor sectors around Orathi Prime would be cleared before we arrived. I asked him what that meant. He said, "It meant the compact's advanced signal element had already transmitted the withdrawal advisory to the 12 neutral party monitoring stations, and 6 commercial transit vessels currently within 2 light hours of Orathi space. I asked whether the Sanctum had been notified. He said the Sanctum had received the same advisory that every other party in the corridor had received. The compact did not issue private warnings to the subject of an operation. I asked whether that was standard. He said it was not a question of standard. It was a question of the compact's design. The compact was not designed to threaten. It was designed to respond. Threatening requires the possibility of the threat being disregarded, and the compact had not been built around that possibility. I wrote that down. I still think it is one of the cleanest summaries of what the Judgment Compact was that I heard from anyone during the operation. The 71-hour transit was not dramatic, in the way that I think readers may expect it to have been. 600 warships in formation is, visually, extraordinary. I spent 2 hours at the observation ports in the first transit day, and I will not pretend that what I was seeing was anything other than sublime in the original sense of that word. The sense that means something so large and ordered that the mind has trouble knowing what to do with it. The formation was not aggressive in its arrangement. It was not arrayed for battle in the conventional sense. The compact's analysts had assessed the Sanctum's orbital defense network and concluded that an offensive formation was unnecessary. What the formation communicated, in its geometry and its discipline, was inevitability. These ships were not rushing, they were arriving. There is a difference, and the difference matters. On the second transit day, I attended the ground element's pre-operation briefing. My presence was permitted under the press charter. I was allowed to observe, not to record until the operation was complete, and my notebook was the only documentation tool in the room. Colonel Svazilev ran the briefing himself. He was not a man who used many words where fewer would do, and the briefing was organized on that principle. He described the Grand Reliquary's layout in the specific terms of a man who had studied it for the full 71 hours. Entry points, interior sightlines, the location of the central chamber where the High Council met, the external processional plaza and its dimensions, 2 service corridors running parallel to the outer wall. He described the architect's wardens, the Sanctum's ceremonial military force, their numbers, their equipment, their likely positions, and the compact's assessment of their willingnesses to engage. The assessment was, full engagement was probable. The warden's function was religious as much as military. They defended the reliquary as an act of faith, not as a calculation of survivability, and the compact's planning had accounted for that. He described the operation's objectives in a sequence that I thought was deliberately ordered. First, neutralize the orbital defense network and the Sanctum's defense fleet. Second, atmospheric insertion of the ground element in 4 waves. Third, secure the reliquary's perimeter. Fourth, secure the reliquary's interior. Fifth, escort the High Council's senior hierarchy to the outer steps. Sixth, the accounting. He did not use the word destroy for any of the objectives that were not the defense network and the fleet. He used secure and escort and account for. When I asked him afterward, in the few minutes before he went back to his command station, whether the precision of the language was deliberate, he said that the precision of the language was always deliberate. He said the compact had a mandate, and the mandate had specific limits, and the language of the operation reflected those limits, and that this was not bureaucratic fastidiousness. It was the difference between an operation with a defined purpose and a war with an open one. I wrote that down too. I spoke with 17 members of the ground element during the transit. This was an infantry equivalent force of 400 personnel whose mission was surface-level enforcement, securing the Grand Reliquary, the Sanctum's central governing and religious complex, and ensuring that the operation's final accounting was witnessed and recorded by the Sanctum's surviving senior hierarchy. I use the phrase surface-level enforcement because it is the phrase the compact used. I spoke with soldiers who had been in the compact for 6, 10, 18 years. Several of them had been at the Dorado stations during the Lentheri occupation. Most of them had not spoken in depth with a journalist before, and most of them were not inclined to be expansive. What I noticed, and I noticed it consistently, across the 17 conversations, was the absence of what I had come to expect from soldiers entering a combat situation. There was no elevated adrenaline in the language. No bravado, no gasol humor about the mission itself. No ritual displacement of fear through aggression. These were not men and women who were managing their terror of what was coming. They knew what was coming. They had been trained for it, and they had been briefed on it. And they were, not calm, exactly, something adjacent to calm that I found harder to look at than fear would have been. A ground element signals technician named Sergeant O'Cake, a heavy-set man in his early 40s, who had served 3 tours with the Meridian Corridor Patrol before joining the Compact 12 years earlier, told me that the Compact operated on a different psychological axis than conventional military service. In conventional service, he said, you spend a great deal of time not knowing when or whether the thing you've been trained for will actually happen, and that uncertainty accumulates into a chronic kind of low-grade readiness that never fully discharges. In the Compact, the thing has already happened before you ship out. The threshold has already been crossed. You are not waiting to find out whether the mission will be necessary. The mission is necessary. What you are waiting to do is the mission. He said that most of the Compact's personnel found this clarifying, rather than frightening. I asked him whether he found it clarifying. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I find it necessary. I find it something that has to be done. Whether that is clarifying or not, I'm not sure I'm able to judge from the inside. Another soldier, a young man, early 20s, whose name I did not get because he became uncomfortable when I took out my notebook and I chose not to press it, said something shorter that I have turned to many times since. He said, 41,000 is not a number you can put in a drawer somewhere. You try to put it in a drawer and it comes back out. You try to, he paused and said, I don't know how other people deal with it. I decided I would deal with it by being here. I noted that down without his name. I think it deserves to be in the record anyway. One of them, a ground element section leader named Corporal Marin Voss, 29 years old, coastal city in the northern hemisphere of Earth's second most populous continent. Put it in terms I wrote down verbatim and have thought about many times since. She said that she had reviewed the Vela station casualty manifest before the transit began. She said that she had done it, not because she was required to, but because she felt that someone on the ground element ought to know who they were, therefore, and that knowing who they were therefore made the mission simple in a way that missions are usually not simple. I asked her what simple meant in that context. She said it meant there was nothing to decide. Everything had already been decided by the Orathi Sanctum in 9 minutes and 12 seconds over the Vela corridor. The ground element's job was just to complete the accounting that the Sanctum had opened. I thanked her. She nodded and went back to her equipment check. And I stood there for a moment in the narrow corridor of the carrier and understood that I was in presence of something I did not entirely have vocabulary for. A grief so thoroughly organized that it had become a form of precision. I will now describe the operation itself as I witnessed it. I am going to be specific because the record requires specificity, and because there is a version of this story that could be told vaguely, in the general language of military action and response, and that version would be incomplete, and in its incompleteness would misrepresent what happened. The operation was not vague, it was extremely specific. That specificity was the point. The Judgment Compact's 600 warships arrived at Orathi Prime at 08:22 local station time, which told Voyages 19 minutes after the destruction of Vela. The transit had run 11 minutes longer than projected due to a formation adjustment at the corridor boundary. The Orathi Sanctum's orbital defense network consisted of 41 platform plimps and a defensive fleet of approximately 190 warships of varying classes. In the first 8 minutes following the Compact's arrival, the defense network and the defense fleet were neutralized. I am using the word neutralized in its full operational meaning. By 08:11:44, the space around Orathi Prime was compact space, 8 minutes. The Sanctum had spent 9 minutes glassing Vela Station. The Compact's orbital response took 8. I want to let that ratio sit for a moment, because the Compact did not design that ratio by accident. The analysts, the planners, the command structure, they were aware of the 9 minutes and 12 seconds. The operation had been timed to be faster, not for symbolic reasons, but because the mission architecture required that orbital space be cleared before the atmospheric insertion of the ground element, and because the compact's assessment of the Sanctum's defensive capabilities had set 8 minutes as the credible lower bound for full neutralization. But the ratio was noted. I know it was noted because Warrant Officer Driss told me, in the flat tone he used for everything, that the tally sheet would be in the record. I descended to the surface of Orathi Prime with the fourth wave of the ground element at 0947, aboard an insertion craft that held 42 personnel plus myself and one other correspondent, a visual documentarian named Ferran Casas, whose footage I have been told will accompany this dispatch. The craft's ramp dropped on the outer processional plaza of the Grand Reliquary at 095217. We were the fourth wave. The first 3 waves had already secured the perimeter, the outer gates, and the reliquary's 3 primary entrances. There was no active resistance at that point. The Sanctum's ground defense forces, a ceremonial military caste called the Architects' Wardens, had engaged the first 2 waves at the outer perimeter and had been, by the time we arrived, comprehensively answered. The Grand Reliquary of the Orathi Sanctum was, I will say this plainly, one of the most extraordinary structures I have ever seen. It was built in a style that I can only describe as deliberate magnificence. Everything oversized. Every surface decorated with astronomical imagery in materials that caught the daylight and refracted it in ways that were obviously intentional. The whole complex arranged to make any being standing in it feel the smallness of individual existence against the vastness of the cosmos. I understand that this was the theological purpose. The Orathi faith was, at its core, a tradition of cosmic scale. The universe was vast. The divine architect had moved across it and left sacred traces, and the role of the Orathi's people was to honor those traces and guard them against defilement. I am not going to editorialize about the Orathi faith. I note as a factual matter that the Orathi faith had produced, among other things, the 12 orbital bombardment platforms that unmade Vela Station in 9 minutes and 12 seconds, and that the Sanctum's senior hierarchy, 15 high priests who governed the faith's military and political functions, had been present in the Grand Reliquary's central chamber when the bombardment order was given and had remained there since, which the compact's intelligence assessment had anticipated and planned around. I note also, because the record requires it, that the 15 high priests were alive at the end of the operation. The ground elements section leaders had the reliquary fully secured by 10-14. I was present when the 15 high priests were escorted from the central chamber to the reliquary's outer steps. I want to describe this accurately. They were not roughly handled. They were not struck, threatened, or abused. They were escorted. Soldiers on each side, an established pace, the kind of formal procedural movement that communicates control without cruelty. Several of the priests were broadcasting liturgical prayers over the Sanctum's internal communications network as they walked. The network was still functioning. The compact's communications element had chosen not to disable it, for reasons I understood later. On the outer steps of the Grand Reliquary, in the full daylight of Orathi Prime's sun, the compact's ground element commander, a colonel named Vasilev, a compact man with gray at his temples and the kind of stillness that reads as permanent, addressed the 15 high priests directly. There was a translator unit, military grade, and the translation was performed in real time. Colonel Vasilev said the following. "I have the transcript," he said. Vela Station was a Class IV habitat installation under joint administrative protection, occupied by 41,220 human civilians. On the morning of its destruction, it housed 4 primary schools, 2 secondary academies, a university annex, and a neonatal ward. The Orathi Sanctum's orbital battery array destroyed the station in 9 minutes and 12 seconds, producing 0 survivors. The Sanctum issued no declaration of war. No cessation followed. No reparation offer was made. Under the terms of the Judgment Compact, activated by the Joint Defense Council 4 hours and 17 minutes after the destruction was confirmed, the Compact's mandate is total, immediate, and final accountability for the responsible party. He paused. Then he said, "The Orathi Sanctum is the responsible party." He then said, And I am transcribing. See precisely. The compact does not issue ultimatums. This is not an ultimatum. This is an accounting. Orathi Prime's orbital defense network and defense fleet have been neutralized. The Sanctum's military capacity has been neutralized. The Grand Reliquary and its contents remain intact because this operation was designed for accountability, not equivalence. We did not glass your world. You should note that we did not glass your world because we are able to, and we chose not to. And you should understand the specific nature of that choice. He then said, 14 civilizations are currently monitoring this operation on standard broadcast frequencies. You will be given a recorder. You will describe to that recorder, in your own language, what has happened here and why it happened, and what the exchange rate was. 3. You will describe the 9 minutes you spent over Vela Station and the 8 minutes that followed. You will the ultimate fully, and you will not omit the names of what you destroyed. The compact will transmit your recording on every reachable frequency. He then said, you may choose not to, that is your choice. Should understand that the compact will provide its own account on every reachable frequency regardless of your choice, and the compact's account will be complete. He then handed the recorder to the eldest of the 15 high priests, a tall figure in ceremonial vestments, older than the others, who had been entirely still since leaving the central chamber. I watched the elder take the recorder. I am going to describe what happened next with the same precision I have used for everything else, because I think precision is the only thing that does justice to it. The elder held the recorder for a long time, perhaps 30 seconds, which in that silence felt much longer. I was standing 40 meters away, in the fourth wave holding position along the processional plaza. See the elder's face in profile. There was no expression that I recognized as grief, or as shame, or as defiance. There was something that I might, if I had to name it, call calculation, not in the cold sense, but in the sense of a being that is computing the full weight of what it is holding and what that weight means. Then the elder began to speak. I am not going to transcribe the full recording here. It runs to 11 minutes, and it will be available in the archive. But I will tell you what the elder said in its first 2 minutes, because those 2 minutes contain what I think is the operational heart of what the compact accomplished on Orathi Prime. The elder said, in the Orathi liturgical register, we came to the corridor because it lay upon the architect's path, and because the presence of the human installation defiled the path, and because 16 years of council had not removed the defilement. The battery array was authorized by the High Council of the Sanctum in full assembly in this chamber on the morning of the attack. The order was considered. It was unanimous. We believed the human installation would be removed, and the humans of that corridor would retreat, and the architect's path would be cleansed. Then the elder said, we did not anticipate this. And then the elder said, and this is the line that has stayed with me. We had read many things about the humans. We had read their treaties, their histories, their correspondence with 14 interstellar parties over 60 years. We believed we understood what they were. We did not understand what they were. The elder described Vela Station. The elder described the 9 minutes. The elder described the 41,000, using the number with what I can only describe as a completeness that was more disturbing than any particular inflection would have been. Saying it the way you say a number when you are forcing yourself to hold it fully rather than letting it stay abstract. Then the elder said, they sent 600. I was told the number when they arrived. I did not have a frame for 600. Defensive fleet was 190 ships. I did not understand the exchange rate until I was standing here, in the daylight, on these steps, and one of their officers told me that the 9 minutes it took us was 9 minutes, and the 8 minutes it took them was 8 minutes, and that I should note the difference. The elder paused and then said, note the difference. That is what he told me. Note the difference. Then the elder said, I am noting it. The recording ran for another 9 minutes. I will not summarize the rest here. The archive will have it. I want to write now about what I observed on the steps and in the plaza while the recording was being made, because I think it is part of the dispatch that is going to get lost if I do not record it now. The compact's ground element stood in formation throughout the 11 minutes of the recording. 2,400 soldiers, in the daylight of Orathi Prime, in the processional plaza of the Grand Reliquary, not moving, not speaking. Weapons held in the position that the military, I am told, designates as at ease, which is not actually ease, but is a position of readiness that looks like stillness, if you are not trained to read the difference. I watched their faces. I have a journalist habit of watching faces when the official full subject of the moment is elsewhere. Most of them were looking at the elder with the recorder. Some of them were looking at the reliquary behind the priests, or at the sky above the plaza, or at nothing in particular. The middle distance look that I have come to associate with people who have done what they came to do and are now simply present in the aftermath of it. Corporal Marilyn Voss was in the second formation row, 8 people to my left. I could see her in profile. She was looking at the elder with the recorder. Face was the face I had seen in the carrier's corridor during the transit. Not warm, not cold. The specific quality of attention that belongs to someone who is holding something very heavy and has decided that holding it is what they are here to do. I thought about the casualty manifest she had told me she had reviewed. I thought about Mira Selene Okafor, 11 weeks old, who had not been asked whether she wanted to be on Vela Station and who had been there anyway. Thought about the university annex and the 3 and 40 students, and about what it meant that someone had decided, in full assembly, unanimously, sacred chamber, to glass a station with 4 primary schools and a neonatal ward because it occupied a cosmological coordinate that their theology held to be significant. The elder finished the recording at 10:47:33. The recorder was collected by a compact signals officer and immediately transmitted on 17 frequencies. The standard broadcast band, 4 neutral party monitoring frequencies, the Meridian Administrative Council's channel, and 11 frequencies that the compact's communications element identified as being monitored by civilizations within. In 17 light years with established receiver technology, the compact's own account, a factual record of the events, the compact's activation, the operations timeline, the casualty figures for Vela Station, was transmitted on the same 17 frequencies simultaneously. Colonel Vasislev stood on the steps for a few moments after the transmission confirmation came in. He did not speak. He looked at the 14 high priests who remained. The elder had not moved. And then he looked at the reliquary behind them. And then he did something I did not expect. He said, in a tone that was not theatrical, not performative, not the voice of a man delivering a line, "The Grand Reliquary will not be touched. Your faith is your own. What your faith authorized on the morning of the attack is a different matter. The two things are not the same, and the compact distinguishes between them." He then said, "You will rebuild your military capacity eventually. This is not something the compact can prevent, and it is not something the compact has been authorized to prevent. What the compact has been authorized to do, it has done." Then he said, and this is the last thing he said before he walked back into the reliquary, to complete the command log. "The next civilization that destroys a human installation and kills human civilians will receive the Judgment Compact's full attention. The exchange rate is in the record. I suggest the record be read carefully." He went inside. I stood in the plaza for a while, after the ground element began its withdrawal processing. The elder with the recorder was still on the steps. The 14 other high-risk priests had been moved to a designated holding space inside the reliquary. They would be released to sanctum governance, personnel within 24 hours, per the compact's post-operation protocol. The elder remained on the steps because the elder had asked to, and the compact had no objection. There was a quality to the daylight on Orathi Prime that I had not fully registered during the operation itself, occupied as I was, with watching and writing and tracking events. Now with the formation on the plaza beginning its methodical withdrawal and the immediate intensity of the operation's climax receding, I noticed it. Orathi Prime's sun was positioned low in its sky from where we stood. The reliquary had been built to receive its light at a particular angle, and in the late morning hours that light came across the processional plaza in a long horizontal pour that caught every surface's decorative metalwork and translated it into something that was objectively beautiful. I noted this in my dispatch notes with a kind of helplessness. The place was beautiful. The people who built it had made it beautiful deliberately. Shh. The faith that built it had also given the order that produced the 9 minutes and 12 seconds over the Vela corridor, and the mathematics of these facts did not simplify by being observed together. I have been asked, since filing the first transmission, whether I believe the compact's operation was proportionate. I want to answer that question directly, because it deserves a direct answer rather than a journalist's careful sidestep. I do not know what proportionate means when the unit of measurement is 41,000 human beings, including 4 primary schools and a neonatal ward, reduced to a thermal bloom detectable at 6 light years in 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Do not know what a proportionate response to that looks like, or whether proportionality as a concept is designed to operate at that scale. I am a journalist, not a moral philosopher, and I am aware of the limits of that credential when the questions being asked are this large. What I can say as a journalist who was present, the compact did not glass Orathi Prime. It did not destroy the Grand Reliquary. It did not kill civilians. It dismantled the Sanctum's military capacity, specifically and completely, and it asked the Sanctum's senior hierarchy to account for what they had done, on the record in their own words, transmitted on 17 frequencies to every civilization within range, and then it left. 1 elder on the reliquary steps with a recorder. 14 high priests in a holding room to be released within 24 hours. Planet intact, a faith intact, a government structure intact and able to function, with its military arm removed, but able to function. Colonel Vasilev had said, "We did not glass your world." He had said, "Note that we did not glass your world." I have been noting it. I walked over to where Ferran Casas was standing. He had been documenting from the far end of the plaza, and I wanted to know what he had caught on the visual record. We talked for a few minutes. He is a quiet man, Casas, a decade older than me, someone who has been documenting conflicts for longer than I have been filing dispatches. He said that in 22 years of conflict documentation he had never filmed anything that made him feel the way the last 4 hours had made him feel. I asked him how it made him feel. He said, "Like something has been established." I thought that was right. I thought that was the most accurate sentence available for what had happened on the steps of the Grand Reliquary. Something had been established. Not a threat. Colonel Vasilev had been clear about that, and I believe the clarity was genuine. Not a boast, not a declaration of supremacy, not an announcement that humanity was more powerful than anyone had previously credited. The compact had not been designed for supremacy. It had been designed for the specific and limited purpose of making the cost of killing humans known, precisely and completely, every party who might one day be in a position to decide whether to cross the threshold. What distinguished this from deterrence in the conventional sense, I think, is what the compact did not do. It did not issue warnings in advance. It did not broadcast its capabilities as a preventive measure. It had simply been there, documented in treaties, present in the record, and when the threshold was crossed, it had become real with a speed and a scale that I believe was itself a message. Not a warning for next time. An accounting for this time. Performed with the efficiency of something that had been designed to be performed efficiently. Without theater, without announcement, without the diplomatic grace period that the Sanctum had apparently counted on. 41,000 dead. 600 warships. 8 minutes. The elder had said, "Note the difference." I have been noting it for the 7 hours since I filed my first transmission. I will probably be noting it for the rest of my career. I am not sure it is the kind of thing you stop noting once you have witnessed the accounting in full. I want to close this dispatch with something that is not, strictly speaking, part of the operational record, but which I think belongs in the full account. Before the insertion craft lifted from the processional plaza, I passed within 15 meters of the elder, who was still sitting on the reliquary steps with the recorder in both hands. I am not in the habit of approaching subjects in the immediate aftermath of events like this one, but I stopped and I looked at the elder for a moment, and the elder looked back at me. I do not know what the elder saw. A journalist with a press credential and a notepad, and, at that point, 6 days of transit sleep deficit, and the look on my face of someone who has been watching things happen that they do not have complete vocabulary. I know what I saw. I saw someone who had, in the course of a single morning, been required to hold two things simultaneously: the absolute certainty of their own faith tradition and its cosmological imperatives, and the absolute reality of what that tradition's imperatives had produced in the world outside the reliquary's walls. I saw someone who was doing the arithmetic of those two things in real time, with no guidance from the tradition about how to reconcile them, because the tradition had not anticipated this specific arithmetic. I thought about what the elder had said in the first 2 minutes of the recording. We had read many things about the humans. We believed we understood what they were. We did not understand what they were. I thought about that sentence for a long time in the insertion craft. I am still thinking about it. Because it is unusual for a combatant to misjudge an adversary, that is perhaps the single most common error in the history of organized conflict across every species that has engaged in organized conflict. But because the elder said it without apparent self-exculpation, simply, we did not understand what they were. As if the not understanding was the complete accounting of the error, and the accounting had to be given honestly or not at all. I thought about what it would mean to be the one survivor left on those steps. Not a hostage, not a prisoner. The compact had been precise about that. A witness. The one person kept in place to hold the recorder and to say, in their own words, on every available frequency, what the exchange rate was. It is not a mercy exactly, but it is not what I would have expected, something that described itself as an accounting. I think about this a great deal. The compact is not a weapon in the conventional sense. It is a record-keeping instrument of a particular kind. It records what was lost, and it responds to that loss in full, and it ensures that the response is itself recorded and transmitted and known. The machinery of it is military. The soul of it, if institutions can be said to have souls, is archival. It is an institution for making sure that what happened is not allowed to happen in the dark, to be euphemized, or to be reduced to the language of theological imperatives and cosmological coordinates. The 41,220 names are not a count. They are the document that authorizes everything else. The machinery of the response exists because of those names. In that order, always in that order. I filed this dispatch at 17:411 station time, 7 hours, and 4 minutes after the Judgment Compact's operations on Orathi Prime concluded. The Compact's carrier, Unbroken Meridian, and its 599 companion vessels are in withdrawal formation. 17 frequencies are still receiving. The record is in the record. I do not know what the Orathi Sanctum will do next. I do not know what any of the 14 civilizations monitoring the 17 frequencies will do next. I am not in the business of prediction. I am in the business of watching what happens and writing it down as accurately as I can. And what happened on Orathi Prime is now written down. 1,220 dead. 0 survivors on Vela Station. 9 minutes and 12 seconds. 600 warships. 8 minutes to answer. The youngest of the dead was 11 weeks old. Her name was Mira Selene Okafor. The Judgment Compact has noted her name in the operational record. On line 1, above the mission parameters. Warrant Officer Driss told me this during the withdrawal processing. I asked him why line 1, above the parameters. He said, because the parameters exist because of the names, and the order should reflect that. I thought that was the most important thing anyone said to me in the 71 hours I was aboard the Unbroken Meridian. Parameters exist because of the names. Write that down, read it carefully. The compact suggests you do.